Welcome to the Leadership Drip, coffee and conversations for leaders leading the next generation. We're excited to welcome to the table another incredible guest. But before we do, could you do us a favor and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode? While you're at it, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. That helps these conversations reach other great leaders. Pour yourself a cup of coffee and get ready to join us at the table for another great episode of the Leadership Drip. Rob, my friend, it is a beautiful day in Southeast Tennessee. It doesn't get much better than this around here.
Well, I don't know, bro. The pollen is killing me today. I sound like a good preacher this morning or today because I got that pollen voice.
I wish I had that going on for me. I think the weather may be better down in Tampa, Florida. Our friend and guest, Aaron Burke, is from Radiant Church in Tampa, Florida. He also does a podcast, which is titled Made for More. He is a leader of leaders. He does a lot of church planning conferences and conversations. He also has a doctorate of ministry, which you just finished yours.
I just finished mine this
quite
week.
Literally finished it.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is in church planting and leadership, which is two of our favorite conversations and why we had him on the show. Aaron, welcome to the table.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Awesome. So you're in Tampa. We have to get your hot take. The Tom Brady situation. Give us your thoughts.
You know, we were praying for miracles. When people doubt, they go, do miracles happen today? And the miracle is that Tom is back. And, I saw a meme the other day that, he's home for 3 weeks taking care of his kids, and he goes, now I'll go back to being beat up by 300-pounders. So I'll go back to that. We're excited. I have
a response to that meme. Is like with the 300-pound men, he's got 300-pound men in front of him, but a 6-year-old at full steam, man, that is unstoppable.
Yeah,
like they will clobber you. So
someone else put one out there that said, with gas prices this high, even Tom Brady's going back to work. So.
That's sad but true.
It's this town, so it's been fun. I go to as many games as I can, but it's.
Did you see it coming? What? No. I don't know. We have some players and some people that are go to the church, obviously. Yeah.
And they were, the talk that morning was that he's going to come back and go to the 49ers.
No.
That was a bummer. And then I was actually teaching a young pastor's event that Sunday night after church, and then I got my phone started blowing up. They're like, he's back. So Tom, if you watch this, if you listen to this, there's a church in Radiant called Radiant Church in Tampa. We've been inviting you for years.
Tom, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm impressed.
Listen, who may need saved the most, and I'm just gonna put out there, maybe Gronk. We may need to get Gronk to your church first. I mean.
Yeah.
That is for sure. He needs Jesus, and that's all I'll say about that.
Well, that's good. But you have been there in Tampa since 2013, Radiant Church you planted. You're now about 9 years in. So when do you quit being called a church planter? This is like a personal question. Like we're like 9 months in, right? And so you've been doing it like 9 years, but they still like, it's Aaron Burke, the church planter, but you guys have been doing it for 9 years. So when do they quit calling us church planters?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have a kid that's 9 years old. I'm still a dad. It's like, it's something you do. You planted a church. Rick Warren is still a church planter. You got a guy. Yeah, it's kind of your identity. So we moved here 9 years ago. It was 9 years ago this month that we had our first interest meeting. And so then we planted the church in September. So we're about 8.5 years old as a church. And so we didn't know anybody in Tampa. Like literally we moved here with a vision from God to plant a church in a large city in Florida. We moved from 7 hours away. We're in Pensacola. So we had family about an hour away from here in Lakeland. So we lived with my in-laws for the first 3 months, and I drove back and forth every day. That was miserable. Not driving back and forth, living with the in-laws. That was miserable. I'm just kidding. But it was a painful season. But we honored God. We did what we were called to do, and and then we started the church in a rundown, dirty dollar theater in the South Tampa community, and that was the only location we could find. And still meet. I'm actually filming this. I mean, I'm right now in that same building that we took over a few years later. We took over the lease, and it's still our broadcast site.
That's very cool. Very cool. Well, I wouldn't be surprised. You know, we were talking a little bit before the show about Saddleback and Rick and the succession plan, and I wouldn't be surprised if Rick plants another church once they get somebody else in place. Like, the man is absolutely unreal, right?
Probably would. I told Katie, I said, I will never do that again. Once we planted the church, I'm like, I am done. That was tough.
Yeah, it's hard. So looking back 9 years, obviously even before that you had some experience, but from a church planner's perspective, from launching a new ministry, from the entrepreneurial sort of viewpoint, what are some of those leadership things you wish you knew then that you know now? Like, what's the carryover?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot. So what I know now is that you never go wrong investing in young leaders. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that was my big thing. I was a youth pastor for 6 years, and I hated youth ministry. I never liked it. I did it because my pastor asked me to do it. I had started a business. It's a long story, but anyway, I had started a business in Pensacola to fund missions work that I was doing. I was a full-time missionary. And so the pastor of the church asked me to be youth pastor. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel called to teenagers or anything. And I wasn't a good youth pastor, but I was a great developer of leaders. And so all I would spend my time with is with the 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And I realized that my investment in them would actually be the very thing that would make Radiant the win that it has been, the little bit of win that it's been. And because those are the people that helped us start the church. And so when I moved, it's 7 hours away. These are the people that came with me. I mean, I just got out of a meeting a few minutes ago with one of them who was a girl who got saved in our youth group. And now she's one of our highest level leaders overseeing a campus, with a couple thousand people at it. Like, she's high capacity, and this is somebody that was I never knew at the time how important it is to invest in leaders, young leaders. So I wish I would have done it more, because it was very organic back then. And I wish it would have been more strategic, because I could have had double the amount of people or triple the amount of people if I would have been more strategic about it.
So walk us through that thought, Aaron. How have you moved from organic, which I think anybody who has a heart for discipleship kind of leans that way, to more strategic in how you're developing leaders at Radiant?
Yeah. Okay, so what we have done is we've been very clear with leadership pipelines. So I remember years ago, I sat down with a young leader, and that is a future church planner. He was leading an organization, and he wants to learn church planning. He was picking my brain and stuff. And I said, well, how? There's a mega church in his community. I said, so are you going to that church? He goes, no. He goes, I went to the church, and he goes, and I was there for like 3 or 4 months, and I'm high capacity, and he goes, and I could not find the way to move forward in my next step. He goes, it almost became like you had to know the person to get them connected. And I thought, okay, we got to fix it. And so the light bulb came on for me of going, in the early church planning days, so much of discipleship and leadership development is organic. It's Jesus and his 12. That works. But it doesn't work when you get to the 5,000. You've got to have a way that you get to the 5,000 and you go, okay, when you're in the 5,000, how does the new person or the person, what's the clear path? So we had to develop clear paths. So we have a few of them. I mean, we have an event that's three or four times a year, depending on need, called Culture. Culture is our movement. So every church has got their assimilation process. That's their way of getting someone from a guest to a member. We try to figure out, we got them on the team. How do we get them from the team to a leader on a team? Well, then we put together these culture days, and it's high vision, our leader profile. We develop what it means to be a leader in our church. So we got that to now moving from leader to going, now how do we see people that are leaders now become pastors? So then I created MIT. So MIT is Ministers in Training. So this is a 6 months program. 3 months of it is teaching. 3 months of it is an apprenticeship. That is all just developing now future pastors. Because these are bankers and nurses and physical therapists that feel like, man, I feel like I've got a calling on my life. I just don't know how to get there. Or I'm pastoring, I just don't know how to officially make it happen. So we just had to create different systems. And we're constantly evaluating our systems. Do we have a way that is clear where people can go, I can move? Because the vision of our church is we move people from where they are to where God wants them to be. So that's the vision. That's all we do. We move people from where they are to where God wants them to be. So if they're unsaved, we move them from unsaved to getting saved. If they're saved but not doing anything, we move them from saved to being activated. If they're a member but they're not a leader and God wants them to be a leader, we move them into leadership. So you got to just have clear paths.
Yeah. So let me play just a little bit of devil's advocate here, because you've met hundreds, if not thousands, of pastors. I've met hundreds, of pastors in this same conversation. We think in systems, we think in clear steps, right? Because that's our natural design. It's how God gifted us, how He wired us. I think there are numerous pastors who would listen to a conversation like this and be totally overwhelmed, not even know what first base is, not even know how to start to create a clear pathway or even what that means. So help those who might be listening, who could be possibly a little tired, a little exhausted. I mean, they're coming out of COVID, like they want to do a good job. They love Jesus. They want to see their church and their community grow. What is their first step? Like how do they chew on this in such a way as that they can process it and implement it maybe in that local church that's 50, 100, 150, 200 people?
Absolutely. So when I talk to people that you're under 100. You're under 100 people in your church. You're a new church plant, or maybe you're taking over an existing church, or maybe you've just been struggling. It's just in the environment that you're in, it's struggle. Or let's be real. Some rural churches, 100 people, that's a big church.
Right.
Like that's it. So let's take context in there. 100 people, what are you going to do? I'm going to put a night on my calendar every week that's going to be about developing next generation leaders. You never go wrong. Put a night on your calendar where you're investing in the leaders. And because, listen, I hear it all the time. It's like, if I just get this person on my staff, if I just find a good associate pastor, if I just found a good youth pastor, don't find them, discover them.
Yep.
Discover them within your church. Let it be one of those things that you go, I'm going to develop who I want to be in that position. So for us, we had volunteer staff for the first 2 years of our church. We did not hire a full-time staff member in our church till we were over 500. So what I did is I developed it. I go, I can't spend time with everybody, but I can invest in some young leaders that'll move the ball forward. So what are you looking for? So I look for leaders that are gatherers. I want to invest in the influencers. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for. So eventually you're going to need this strategic thinker. Eventually you're going to need the out of the box creative. You'll need that eventually. But right now you've got to invest in the influencers, because if you can get people that build teams around you, look at the person on your team that is going, they throw a Super Bowl party and 30 people show up to their house. Okay, you're a church of 100 and you have a person who has a Super Bowl party with 30 people show up. You better be developing that.
Right.
And get over the insecurity that they don't need to be developed by you. That you've got something like, no, you go through 21 irrefutable laws of leadership with John Maxwell. Don't recreate something. Don't sit there and go, I got to have some amazing original content. Go through a Mark Batterson book with them. Mm-hmm. Find ways to grow together and develop a team, because you'll never go wrong with investing in young leaders. And because to me, it's the best leaders I've got were new 6 years ago. But if you got to look at it like the seed, I'm going to plant the seed, and I know it's not going to reap it years from now. I mean, right now, but it'll reap it years from now. Right. And I have to be okay with that. A couple things on this that I think would be helpful is, if you're just starting out, you get to create your culture.
Right.
And so that's why outside hires are not great normally when you're early on church. Outside hires are when you want to change a culture.
Right.
I hire from outside when I don't like what I'm doing. So that's the way we work. So I didn't like the way our kids ministry was being ran. So we hired from without. I didn't like the way that, creatively we were doing some stuff. So we hired from without. But inside hires reinforces our culture. So when you're new and you're young, you want to reinforce who you are with these young leaders, and so you got to put a night on the calendar to develop them.
And I think the real thing here is we have to resist the temptation to make it happen or have it happen right now, because in leadership investment is a long-term conversation, right? That's a long view. That's a long view of church health and church growth, right? And so I think it's the better view. There are things that we need to have executed right now, like, fine, that's fair, but in terms of the health and longevity and the growth of the church, and growth not meaning numerical, I mean growth in terms of discipleship and formation, that's a long view conversation. So resist that temptation to do it right here, do it right now,
and resist the unmet expectation that every person you invest in is you're going to get a reward out of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Exactly.
It doesn't work. I invest in 5, and 2 of them really move the ball forward.
Right.
And you know what? The other 3, I don't understand it, and I don't get it, and I don't know why they go to another church, or I don't know why they just become a better leader in the bank that they're in at. But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is I pray to the Lord of the harvest to raise up laborers, and when He brings them to me, I'm going to invest in them.
Right. So have you had to live sort of open-handed with those leaders, Aaron? Like, because people come and go, and sometimes we invest in people and God calls them elsewhere. So I know there's some maybe fear of leaders going, hey, I'm going to spend 2 years with you, and God's going to send you to Columbia or whatever it is. So with Radiant, have you had to live kind of open-handed and be like, if God sends you somewhere else, I've got to let you go?
Yeah, well, we excommunicated with their leave. We don't people leave. You know what? I have found that if you do live open-handed in the same way that God challenges us to live open-handed with our finances, then we don't become. And by the way, this is a hot issue for today, because the weird, toxic, almost abusive, I don't want to overuse that word, cultures of like, if you're not for us, you're against us.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going to get everything out of you. We can't live in that world. We got to treat people like, hey, I remember what Aaron Burke was like at 20 years old.
Yeah.
I was not as reliable as I am at 38 now. So I just got to understand. And I got to remember, I was a youth pastor for 6 years. I did transition. Now I transitioned well, but at the same time, I left a hole there. And that is just struggle.
Right.
And so I've just got to extend grace to people because it was extended to me. And I've got to understand that my wife and I had a conversation this morning. We had a guy come to us before COVID, this whole thing, and he came into one of our departments and left a year later. And so, he doesn't have the best reputation from our staff. And I told my wife today, I said, I'm so glad he came. The church benefited by this. Mm-hmm. He was able to take this to the next level. And honestly, I don't think we understand. He actually is the one that spotted our leader that is now the pastor of that department. And I said, we've got to stop looking like people are the problem in this. Instead, maybe God brings them in for a season and moves them
right. Yeah.
with thick skin and a soft heart. Don't get bitter in ministry. People leave. One of my closest friends helped us start the church. Just a pillar in our church sat down with me last summer and just said, the Lord has told me it's time to move.
Yeah.
And it grips my heart, and it's like we cry together, and you know, and we're still some of my closest friends, and it was tough, but you can't. It's God's church. We're all expendable. We're all interim pastors. I'm the interim pastor at this church. I might be interim for 30 years, but guess what? Somebody else is going to take it after me. So we're all interim. until the Lord gets, we're building something that's for thousands of years. So
and
look at people that way.
our culture is obviously had such an impact on how we organize, how we administrate the church. And so we get caught in this tension a lot of times as leaders of growing communities versus creating commodities, right? I mean, it's like we need those executables, but at the same time, there's still the Imago Dei. There's still people made in the image of God who he has poured his life into and died for and all the things, right? So it's an odd tension a lot of times, especially as a young church planner.
Right.
Like when you just need
the
that
church
pulse.
is young. I don't know if I'm young.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm saying, but the church plan is young, and you got to have that pulse at the door, greeting someone, and they become commodities, not a part of the community. But I think we've talked a lot about sort of that systematic process of developing leaders and the difference that would make. And so I think as we frame that conversation, I think it's a good point that you're making, Aaron, that we need to just live very open-handedly.
The last couple of weeks, we had Pastor Chris Hodges on a couple of weeks ago, and in the echoes of my brain is when he said, when we were an early church, we were developing 10 drummers because we knew we were going to need drummers.
Yeah.
Like it was this perpetual, like we're developing with the vision of multiplication and growth because you're going to have the leaders to grow. Now, I know your heart is multiplication. I've heard you say from the stage and from your podcast as well, get to 2 services as quickly as possible. Yeah. Unpack sort of that thought for especially maybe a small church or a young church, why that's important.
I think you get to 2 services because it provides health. My goal in anything that we do as a church is health. It's not growth.
Right.
What's going to be the healthiest for our team and what's going to be the healthiest for our community. So I've never been to a restaurant that has one item on the menu. So, or one time of the day, that 1 hour that you can get there to eat. No, I want to know there's options. So churches will grow based on options. I hate that the sounds consumer-like, but it's the reality. The more options, the better. Life Church, before they add another campus, has already had 6 or 7 services at that building. Yeah. Just something about the idea that how the church grows. So the stat is that if you have 100 people in attendance, if you go to 2 services, your church will grow 25% without any additional marketing or anything anyway, just because of the option. So you got to understand options help. Secondly, I think it's the serve one, sit one culture. It's the best thing for somebody that's serving in a children's room. They're serving with children's ministry. Is they're using God's gift, but they have to be in the presence of God and experience the service. And if you have people in a church plan or in a church where their entire Sunday experience is with a bunch of some babies and they're using their gift, but they're not being filled back up, it destroys. I'm telling you, what most people tell me is I can't go to 2 services because of children's ministry. And I respond to them you go to 2 services because of children's ministry.
Right. Yeah.
It is children's ministry that brings me to multiple services because we launch campuses, every campus with 2 services. These are campuses that run 300-400 people after they're done, after their launch, in auditoriums that are seeing 700-800 people. So you got to think realistically, adults. There's 120 adults in that auditorium. Why do you need 2 services? Because of children's ministry.
No, to completely, completely agree.
So I think obviously multiplication, multi-site models, even sort of the micro-site movement is really, I think, is beginning to catch speed in some areas. So all of these models, and we've talked about it before on the show, they all seem to be working, right? Now, we all have our convictional sort of approach. You certainly have yours. Radiant does an amazing job of how you carry forth those values. And so how do we discover, like when we talk about moving to 2 services or multiplying the effect of what we do. Like, how do we discover, like, what is the right approach for our community, our church, right? Because a rural church is going to approach it different from an urban church or whatever, like West Coast, East Coast. Like, I mean, we could talk about the differences. So how for you would you coach someone in sort of discovering what their best multiplication model might be?
Yeah. So be a student of this whole industry. And what I would tell you is find the thing that makes you most alive. So I'm a student of this industry. All I love to talk about is church planning and multi-site. That's what I love to talk about. Yeah. So I hear about it all the time. And there's certain things that I hear about, and I'm listening to it going, why in the world would someone do that? I wouldn't even attend that church, let alone lead that way. But then I see, I don't know if you've ever been to like Kansas or Texas. Texas is a good example. You go to Texas. Everybody in Texas loves Texas. I don't understand it. Yeah. I can't stand Texas. I'm like, what is it about Texas that makes you come alive? And they just love Texas. I love multi-site video venue. I love it. I have studied it. I've broken it down. I think it just makes me, I've never said it's most effective. I say it's what I'm most passionate about. Mm-hmm. So stop telling other people my way's best. My way is my preference.
Right.
But dinner party churches, I don't understand it. But that's somebody's thing that makes them come alive. Micro church and the whole different thing. So for me, and then the multi-site models, then you have live preaching versus video preaching. I'm a visionary. I don't want other people giving vision for the church. Right. I want to be the visionary. Mm-hmm. And I preach vision every Sunday. So for my model, it works for me. But other churches do it different ways and let them thrive. But for me, I'm so sold on it. And I would say whatever you do something that makes you come alive, that you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, nobody else is going to.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's so true. And so you guys are at 7 campus or 8?
Yep.
7. You're going to 8. And the goal is 10 in 10 years. That's an unreal pace. So how have you sort of been able to sustain such a pace and not burn out your team moving that quickly?
Well, our goal again is health, not growth.
Right.
So we do things based on the health of our church, not based on a target growth. So some growth plan. So yes, we have a vision given to it. It was at CNN conference, one of the first years. I'm sitting there laying on the floor praying, and I felt like God said 10K for Tampa Bay. And I pulled out my journal and wrote 10,000 people in 10 locations by our 10-year anniversary. Now, was that God's idea, my idea? I don't know. It came to my mind. So that's our plan. I refuse to let that plan kill our staff.
Right.
So if we don't get there and have 3 more campuses in the next 2 years, then I'm not going to lose sleep over that. But if we get there, so for instance, we weren't going to do a campus in August. We were going to do 1 in January and 2 next year in the fall. So that gives us a year and a half right now to launch 3 campuses. We kind of got that mapped out. And we moved our campus from August to January just because COVID for us is like we're finally on the other side, hopefully, of this thing. Our campuses are growing again. We're past pre-COVID numbers. We opened a couple of permanent sites. So we feel like we have some traction. We're like, let's get those campuses up enough to now we can launch some locations off of it. What's the best for the health of the church? We looked at that. Mm-hmm. But now, in one of our communities, we found out a building's going up for sale that might be a God thing. Well, now we go, we weren't planning on it. Our staff is healthy. We could probably launch this year. So we're opportunistic. We're going to respond with what's healthy for us, and then what are the opportunities out there. And, obviously you said you had Chris Hodges on. He's coached me on this many times. It's, do you have more people than you need? Do you have more leaders than you need? And do you have more money than you need? That's how you launch campus. So you multiply by, and that's my job. Your job as a senior pastor is to raise. So I raise vision by preaching. I'm the vision caster of the church. I raise leaders by strategically having some kind of leadership development, and I raise money. And I that is my primary goal, is I raise leaders, raise vision, raise money. And so I realize our multi-site is based on all three of those.
Yeah. It reminds me of if you ever read a classic Andy Stanley book, I think it was called Next Generation Leader. He said in that, what can you do that nobody else can do? And as lead pastors, really, those three things, the vision, maybe you can get other people to lead leaders or raise leaders, but it seems to fall back to the visionary pastor. And raising money, like they're not going to take, somebody else isn't going to come up there and buy in necessarily on the money piece if it's not coming from the lead pastor. So that's sort of a leadership principle. Like Aaron's doing what nobody else in his team can do. And it seems like you're delegating and releasing what other people can do in their gift sets to do well. And it's creating that ripple kind of health and growth in Radiant.
I hope so.
That's the plan, right?
We'll see. I guess.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about sort of, again, this church dynamic, right? Because when we start talking about church plants, we typically tend to skew younger in the church plant realm. But then we also have churches that are well established that skew heavier towards the upper age demographic. And so like Barna points out, Matlock and Kinnaman and all these guys are pointing out the necessity for intergenerational relationships within a healthy church context, right? So how are you helping sort of push the needle in healthier sort of directions when you typically skew young, but you need the older influence? Or if you're coaching a pastor who has anyone or everyone over the age of 50, like how are you coaching them to bend more young? Like what's the mechanisms there?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been something we're super intentional about. There's obviously a very big push, and rightfully so for racial diversity in church. I think that is a major problem, but I think equally as problematic is there's a lack of age diversity in church. Mm-hmm. And it is shocking to me. So, for instance, I have to be intentional. It's a little bit easier now. I feel like I'm in a little bit sweeter spot. But when I launched the church when I was 29, it's hard at 29 years old to attract 55, 60-year-olds. Yeah. It's a little easier at 38. It'll be easier for sure when I'm 48. But you've got to be intentional about making a point to go, I'm not just called to activate 20-year-olds in ministry. So, for instance, the meeting I had right before this that went long, which I apologize, the meeting I had right before this was with a 72-year-old retired pastor who just retired and moved down and now is living in our community and has attended our church the last 6 months. So my goal is I've got this gold mine. He's got 40 years of pastoral ministry. Yeah. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want a title. He just says, I'm here to serve the church. Well, great, because when I see other 67-year-olds walking in our church, I want them to see you in that foyer. I want them to see you up front of the prayer team. We've got to have spaces for people from all generations to be there. And I think it's very common for us to think older needs to find a space for the younger. But I would actually challenge a lot more young ministers, young leaders. You need to provide places for people that are older to be on your staff, to be on your teams. Yeah. And that has been a game changer for our church. Some of our best leaders, we've made space for them that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So you just got to have that moment because people want to get to a place. It's one of the very first things that people do is they look around and go, are there other people like me here? Mm-hmm. And I can't be the young church because a young church, I want to be the young church. I want to reach the next generation. I always want to get younger, but I want to get younger, but I have to, you can't reach the next without having the resources and the wisdom of the previous generation.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the sort of the struggle our young church has kind of found itself in. Like we are aiming very strategically at young adults and college students, and we're winning them. And the prayer has been, God, send us wiser voices. And so the paradox I'm hoping plays out, Aaron, and maybe you've seen this, is that by keeping your church somewhat young and vibrant, there are people in their 40s and 50s who still want to feel that way and be a part of that energy. Is that holding true, or am I way off base there?
Yes. I'll tell you what I think is more important.
Okay.
Because if it was all energy and vibe, they would go to the local club too,
right,
because it's really cool. What I think is, I think there's two things that do it. One is I want them to constantly hear life change stories of 20-year-olds. Legitimate salvation stories.
Right.
Not like, hey, I found my best friends here at the church. No, I came far from God, having a relationship with God. That is what I feel like. Again, we opened this thing up with Tom Brady. What does Tom Brady did? He's a great name, but I'll tell you what he also did. He started winning games. And a lot of pastors are going, like, I just don't understand why people aren't buying in. Win. Here's how you win. You see lives change.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so older generation buys into the fact that they're winning, not because they look cool, but because there's actual salvation experiences. Yeah. And then the second one that I just feel like it's huge is this idea that they're bought into sound biblical teaching. Let's be real. Like, in a world, so I did a message a couple months ago in a relationship series, and I did it on God's perfect plan for human sexuality. Little hot button topic. Mm-hmm. My 20, 30, 40-year-olds, great. High five, Pastor. Cool message. I'll tell you who I heard it from. The 60-plus-year-olds. They're the ones that are calling me, texting me, going, thank you. This is why I'm here.
Yeah.
I want to hear the next generation hear this.
Yeah.
There's something about that.
And we were hearing that same kind of sentiment from multiple generations. Can we reference Pastor Chris Hodges, who was on the show? Yeah. But we heard the same thing from a 25-year-old leader named Luke Lefevre, who was saying the exact same thing. Like, this generation does not want to back off from the truth, so we don't need to be soft in how we deliver truth. And people are loving, like, it's from the 50s and 60s. Like, I think Pastor Chris said that the hard repentance message is the new attractional church. Like, I think that's how he stated it. Like, that is the new attraction.
Brie Odom said it.
Yeah.
Charlie Hughes said it.
Yeah.
Elliot Bonita Jr. has said it. Like, I mean, anyone who's sort of in that Gen Z vibe has echoed the same thing. Like, call us to repentance and help us to understand what we are actually believing and putting our faith on the line for.
Yeah, ambiguity doesn't work anymore.
Exactly.
This idea of you discover on your own has totally... People think it's foolish. So I'm here to, what is God's opinion of it? And let me know, Pastor. And I might challenge it, but at least let me hear it.
Yeah,
right.
That being done with being different than the way it was done in the 80s, with a little bit of grace and actually a lot of humor.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I feel like it's different. We're not yelling at people. So I'm not preaching a message on God's perfect plan for human sexuality going, and you, and pointing the finger on. It's a lot of laughter. It's a lot of grace. It's a lot of but it's wrapped in the truth of God's word. So I do think we've got to get away from the ambiguity, we don't want people to know what we really think because we're trying to seek. It was an overcorrection, the secret movement was.
Yeah.
I feel like.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I think so.
And we've had a lot of conversations about sort of that attractional movement, seeker movement sort of conversation too. And I think, we don't want to overcorrect the other direction either, right? So there is value in being sort of either aesthetically or stylistically the kind of place where people want to come to. They want to enjoy their local church, right? So there's some truth to that. But it's certainly not. I don't think the attractional seeker model has the front door power maybe that it used to. I don't think so. And I'm sort of out of full-time pastoral ministry in the local church right now, but I don't feel like that has the grip that it once did.
Yeah, I think I don't remember who said it, one of our guests, but like the excellence is still excellence. We want to do things with excellence. And with the stern, not stern, that sounds terrible. It's such a tough word, but the truth and call to repentance, and even the call to purpose and ministry. It's like, in what you're saying with humor and grace, all those things kind of tangled in there helps balance that, which I think we've made overcorrections several times in the church. And we may be more centered than we've ever been in some of those things in certain at least tribes of it. So
yeah, I would even go a bit further, going, what is it today that they're looking for? And I would say that genuine, legit encounters with God. Mm-hmm. So providing, because what is the verbiage out there? So you go with what is the hot verbiage, and how is the church missing it? Yeah, it's vibe, it's energy, it's, what is this? It's this. I feel this. Well, we need to. We've overcorrected because we grew up in crazy charismatic world. Mm-hmm. So we've shied away from a lot of the spirit-filled world. That is honestly the very thing that I want people to go. I love the excellence, great guest experience. Wow, the kids had a great, safe, fun time. All of that to be secondary to, I came in and I felt God. Yep. Something was unique in this building. During worship, tears are flowing from my eyes because God is in the room. That is the new attractional church. Yeah. Provide an environment that's not weird. Mm-hmm. God can move in the environment. So I think that's where we're seeing a little bit. I want that. I want that in every one of our services. Because cool lights, every church has it now in America. It's different. We're not in the 90s anymore where we go, man, our stage, we painted it black. That's over.
That's done. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest echoes of Gen Z and their desire for local church engagement. It's beyond just sort of those lights and smoke and all that stuff. That's cool. Keep it, do it if that's your thing, if that's your vibe. Yeah. But it's not the preeminent, necessary sort of approach. And anyway, so let's try to change gears really quick, because I think there's another really important conversation that I hope we can have in the few minutes we got left. But there's been a lot of noise lately. Obviously, at the time of this recording, a huge impact on Hillsong and that church movement. And I'm not calling out names. There are a lot of other names that we could call. That's just the most current one. Well, there's been sort of this upheaval of just pastoral challenge, right? So you recently talked about the 7 S's that you and your wife Katie sort of practice. Yeah,
the sevens.
The sevens? Is that what it is? The sevens? Not the 7 S's, the sevens. Sorry. But anyway, you guys have a rhythm in your marriage. So, I know this is a topic of hot conversation, but how do leaders, how do pastors keep themselves focused on the main things? How do their spouses sort of keep healthy themselves, not just the church?
Yeah, so let me just touch real quick on the 3 sevens. The 3 sevens are every 7 days we get a date, and ours has turned into mornings, which is awesome. So we have a date breakfast on Wednesday mornings. So that's a big win. Every 7 weeks we get away for a day together, go spend a night somewhere, go get away. Just me and her. Sometimes I'm traveling to go preach somewhere. She comes with me. We get some time alone. And every 7 months we go on a vacation. It's extended time away without kids. If kids are there, it's called a trip. If it's me and her, it's a vacation. So it's just a different world. So we do that. That being said, I wrote down, and I'll go through it very fast, but I wrote down 5 major lessons. This is not planned to share with you guys, but I think it's necessary because it's so fresh in my mind. Out of the Mars Hill and Hillsong stuff, 5 lessons that I'm going to share with my staff, and it'll probably even go on my podcast. I'll probably go on your podcast first. What I've learned from this. This is my lessons. Maybe the church can learn something. It's why we fall. So here's the reasons. Number 1, we fall when we confuse ministry growth with God's approval of our lifestyle. So we have this whole idea that God is okay with me because my ministry is growing. Mm-hmm. That's not true. That is not true. We see all throughout Scripture, God used really, really flawed people that should have been in counseling and should have been really dealing with some deep-rooted issues. Yeah. God used them. And it's not approval of your lifestyle. Number 2, We fall when we stop treating we fall when we stop treating small things like they're big things. So there's a common denominator amongst most of both organizations and all the other falls that have happened, where things that were once big things in ministry. So, for instance, as a church planner, you remember when you got this first few people on your dream team, and you're like, "Oh my God, people are actually with us," And now the church grows, and you're like, they left. Who cares? God will replace them. Somebody else. We stop treating these things like they're big. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, the big one for that is finances. I remember when our church had a budget of a couple $1,000s in that month, every penny was accounted for. Well, now we're millions and millions of dollars. You got to be careful. That's where churches fall, when you stop treating small things like they're big things. And here's the third one: is we fall when we get entitled. There's an "I deserve this." I deserve this amount of pay. I deserve to be treated this way. I deserve to be called this title. I deserve to fly first class. I deserve to be respected. By the way, I deserve my wife to treat me better, and this girl's going to treat me better than my wife would treat me. I deserve. It's an entitlement. It needs to be ripped out. The last two, we fall when we refuse to let people tell us no. You've got to get to a place where somebody can always tell you no. And by the way, that person that can tell you no has to be inside of your church. It cannot be an external pastor. I have external pastors that can tell me no. But I also submit myself to our executive leadership team that if I'm doing something stupid, they're allowed to tell me no. If I have an idea, they're allowed to, that's dumb, they can tell me no.
Yeah.
If you ever get to a place where nobody can tell you no, you're destined to fall. You will make stupid choices. And the last one is we fall when we make ministry about us instead of about Jesus. So, I repost the sermon clip because I look cool in it, not because Jesus is glorified. Like, let's evaluate it. Really? Like, why do we? Was it a success because this many people DM'd us? Or, like, it's so much about us. And that's where the celebrity thing has got to die. It's not about us. It's got to be about him. Mm-hmm. And you've got to ask yourself, like, am I building something that if nobody knows my name but Jesus is glorified, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
And I think the reality is most of us would do it, but we go in the back of our mind and go, but I really want my name to be known.
Yeah.
Crucified. That's why Paul says I got to die daily. I got to lay down my life daily.
Yeah.
So those are my 5 lessons. I wouldn't even plan on sharing it, but I think it's something
that's valuable. And I think Aaron, what we're seeing, especially in the clips and the snippets, like, and listen, we're just as guilty. Our little church plant, we post things, but like it seems like it's the part of the clip that's like feel good or funny, but little like biblical context. Like it's like. Yeah. I don't hear a scripture ever in an Instagram reel. Like it just doesn't seem to happen.
Yeah.
Like it's not the scripture's never read in the Instagram reel. Like it's alluded to maybe. So I think that's the 5th one is such critical that we have to make it about Jesus or keep it about Jesus, not make ministry about us.
It's my entire Lenten focus, and we've already talked about this, is motivational holiness. Like for the whole Lent season this year, like it's all about motivational holiness, and man, I don't really like what I'm uncovering in my own heart, right? I mean, so I think that's something that we as leaders in our own spiritual health and walk and sort of formation and discipleship, we need to ask ourselves, those hard questions like, what am I doing out of my ego boost, and what am I doing out of that desire to honor, glorify, make Jesus the preeminent, famous one, or whatever terminology you want to use. But that's a tough one. It's a tough one for leaders because we are sort of lifted and exalted in a lot of ways, and that can get to us really quick.
My wife and I even talk about that. Like, people come up to us all the time like, oh my gosh, we see y'all in person. It's a big deal. You guys are like, and we're nobodies in the church world, but in our community, people think we're a big deal. And I'm going, it's just unhealthy. And we got to always point it back to, like, we're nothing. We're approachable. We're normal people. And speaking of Rick Bourne, Chris Hodges, these are people that been around. I mean, like, you get around Chris Hodges, you're sitting there going, this is a normal human being.
Yes.
And I think we just got to make it about Jesus again. And I'm not saying Hillsong or Marcel or anything didn't, because they've all seen fruit that I don't know if I'll ever see that kind of fruit in my life. The amount of impact, I can't imagine the pressure. But I know for me and my little influence, I'm going to go, this is just what I'm going to do to make sure I avoid some of the pitfalls that I think other people have.
I think it's one of the things that doing this podcast has taught us, Aaron, and we've had some high level leaders on here that I don't know why they said yes. We don't have a huge following. We're a couple guys just kind of scuffling along, trying to figure some things out. But these people have graced us in the grace of God. They've said yes. And every one of them is super approachable, very humble, and they just want to engage in the conversation. And it's like the celebrity part kind of like, it wasn't that we got elevated to celebrity status to enter the room. It's that they were always somebody who could be approached. Yeah. And I think that humility in leadership is a critical component. And again, I've come to you twice now in two different conferences, and you're that kind of guy. I'm like, hey, Aaron, this is who I am. The first time we were in Franklin, Tennessee at a conference in Houston. So you embody that and live that sort of approachable humility, and we appreciate that, and love sort of the leadership lens you look through in the multiplication. I know that our listeners are going to benefit from this conversation. We have one final question that we ask every guest on the show. We do record here on the beautiful Lee University campus. If you've never been here, you should come. What is one lesson you learned in college that did not take place in the classroom?
Oh my gosh. The lesson I did not learn. The lesson I did learn in college that did not take place in the class. Yeah, how to deal with conflict. Listen, college is all about relationships, and there's not like at least there wasn't at the university I went to. There wasn't like an entry-level class to say, hey, by the way, you're about to get to the closest relationship you'll ever have in your life. Here's how you actually manage them and deal with conflict. So I had to learn that outside the classroom.
That's awesome.
That's true.
That's so good.
So true. Well, the podcast that you host is called Made for More Podcast. It's a great listen. So when you're done listening to this, flip over there. It's a Radiant Church in Tampa. Aaron is a great guy. And as we always say here at the Leadership Drip, you've got a seat at the table.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Leadership Drip. If something from this episode was helpful for you, then share it on your social media and tag us. If we see it, we may reshare it on our channels. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and remember, you always have a seat at the table.